Howdy, YouTube. I picked up this record at the library book sale. It's The First Family, a comedic spoof on the Kennedys, and after looking it up, it's actually a pretty interesting record with a pretty interesting history. Um, First off, it really didn't feature anyone of note initially in the cast. They all kind of came to fame afterwards, or were just kind of smaller names that they had work, but no one really cared. So, with the success of this album afterwards, it kind of started a ball rolling towards there being a new form for people trying to break into comedy and finding success. Otherwise, like nightclubs or trying to get on television was really not that easy and not profitable for your average person. And after this, everyone was like, "Oh well, we can give this a go. It's not that hard to sit in a studio and even have a live audience to listen to this, and we'll make a record or two and see how it goes." So I thought that in itself was fairly interesting. It came out via Cadence Records, which at the time was just kind of a indie record label. It because it was rejected everywhere else. Um, some people were very opposed to it, like let me see in my notes because I want to get it right. So it was James Haggerty, who was an executive at Paramount Records and President Eisenhower's former press secretary. He was very opposed to this kind of thing really even existing because the general opinion was that it would be very degrading to the presidency and that all the other communist countries would really love this kind of thing. So he was like, no, like, I'm not making this for you. We're not distributing it. And that was a kind of general opinion. Of course, afterwards, sales went through the roof. It was pretty soon that they broke 1,000,000. It was like they sold because when it came out, it was right at holiday season. So they broke 2.5 million copies really, really quickly, in a couple of weeks. And they ended up selling about 7 million copies, and it received very heavy radio play, which helped boost sales quite a bit. And it, at the time, set the world record for the fastest selling album. Of course, I imagine now it's a little different, but this was 1962, so what are you gonna do? And really, it all kind of took off from there. Pretty, the next year they released Part 2, which had its own opposition from the star Von Meter because he did not want to be typecast as a JFK impersonator. So for the second album, he actually said no. I don't want to record it. And then they, hit him with $1 million lawsuit, which in current money is like rounded up, it's basically 10 million bucks. So that's nothing really to laugh at, especially when it all comes so quickly. But given that, really it probably wouldn't have mattered because as far as the star went, his life really ended up being ruined from this record. Immediately after the President Kennedy's assassination, which I thought this was a nice touch from Cadence Records, because immediately after they pulled all the records from the store shelves and they pulled everything from production, everything they had, and they were like, we destroyed it. Like, we're not making it, it's gone. And they said fairly publicly, like, we don't want to cash in on his death. It's not appropriate. The same night, another comedian, Lenny Bruce, who was kind of known for, like, no subject was really off limits. And it was that night that his opening line was basically like, man, Von Meter is fucked. And he was right. He went on to try and produce a couple other comedy albums. Nothing really worked. And he basically ended up moving to another town fairly close by and being a local character, which after really what was so much excitement in basically 1 year from November to November, it's kind of disappointing, but I'm not sure it could have turned out any other way. During that time, though, like, he was getting invited to all the comedy events. Like, he was even invited to, like, join Frank Sinatra and his whole gang, and Von Meter probably was like, ooh, like, mob. Like, I can't really hang with that crowd, but thank you. Like, that's cool, but no. And one of the things that he ended up telling the LA Times when he was giving some of the interviews was basically because he immediately spent like the millions he had made, and his interview stated, I didn't know how to handle it. It was a blur. I thought stars were supposed to do certain things. So I'd fly here, fly there, buy anything I liked in a store window. My ego and arrogance were way out of control. Playing the president was easy, but playing God was a bitch. And he had later stated a few years later that really he just called himself a living reminder of the tragedy. He did resemble the late president, and he did obviously sound like him, so you can kind of see why bookings really just dried up, and all the fancy friends that you would have got in that very short time period just stopped calling back. They were just like, ooh, like, I don't want to deal with it, because probably for a lot of people anymore, and certainly, like, I wouldn't have known what it was really like, but Uh, my mother was school age at the time, and what she recalled from that day was basically like when the news broke and all her teachers found out, was just that everyone was like, everything shut down, and like all the teachers were like running down the halls, like just in hysterics, like crying, like everyone, like the principal, just everyone was like crying because it was just so bad. And it like, I mean, it, I'm not sure you can even imagine something like that. I know, like right now in the current states, a lot of people really are very disheartened about it. So even really trying to imagine like over the president's death, but he was beloved. Like everyone knows that. So, um, but so kind of getting away from that part, but it is an interesting sideline. But um, Mr. Kennedy was said to be a fan of the record, and he would open a couple of speeches like, oh, well, like Von Meter couldn't come tonight, so I came myself. And he was said to like play it for people. And at one conference, one of the reporters asked, like, just if the record had produced annoyment or enjoyment. And he basically responded, like, well, like, I listened to it, and frankly, I thought he sounded more like Teddy than me. Like, so now he's annoyed. Which, that's funny. That's just funny. On the flip side, Jackie Kennedy was not really a fan of the record. Really, after listening to it, I kind of get it. She did quite a bit of really important work for the United States and just the White House in general. One of the main things was just the historical aspect of it, of preserving things. So for her, it kind of made it more, just more like very soft spoken and a little flighty, and just like, oh, well, we're redecorating, and oh, look at the construction crew, they're working. So I could really understand where, for the amount of work that she was putting into it, I can understand if you're like, this isn't funny. Like, this is really important to me and to you. Like, this is important to the country, and I don't appreciate it being made fun of. So, because one of the things that she did that is still very, very important, and I think a lot of us today really do appreciate it, is Grand Central Station. Because without her and her work, it would have been demolished. But she thought it was very important and very historical to our country, and I happen to agree. Like, I don't think it's really outdated, and even if it was, it's still important, and I still want to look at it. Like, I still want to go there, and I want to look at it just because it's kind of cool, and it's Grand Central Station, and everyone knows about it. Um, and that's mainly it for the record. Um, this was really the best received out of the bunch immediately after, there were lots of copycats. And that continued down the line. Like Reagan, Johnson, everyone got at least one. And there were also others that would try to confuse buyers into buying them as like things like, like the family at the White House or like the other family, etc. The other family specifically was kind of satirizing Khrushchev and his regime at the time, and there were others that were not as funny, at least in my opinion. Others kind of imagining a Jewish president or a black president, and I'm not necessarily in love with that whole idea, but we kind of see how long it really took for us to get there. So at the time, people will make money off of whatever they really want, so fair play. Whether or not, you love it in hindsight, it is what it is. But yeah, I just thought it was pretty interesting, and I thought I'd share it with y'all. So, thank you for listening, and if I find any other records that end up having a couple of wiki pages and articles, I'll make another video. But thank you for watching, and like and subscribe if you like. Thank you.